They laughed, not politely, not nervously. They laughed. A chamber full of ancient civilizations, species that had walked among the stars before Earth's oceans even had fish in them, and every single one of them looked at the human delegate standing at the center of the Galactic Council and laughed. That was their first mistake, because here is something the galaxy had never bothered to learn about humans. We remember every slight, every dismissal, every moment someone looked at us and said, "You don't belong here." We write it down, we carry it, and when the time comes, we collect. The human delegate's name was Commander Elias Vorn, retired military, former head of Earth's Deep Space Defense Division, a man who had spent 30 years studying every major alien civilization in the known galaxy, their strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their assumptions. He had requested this audience not because Earth was desperate. He requested it because Earth was ready. When the laughter finally faded and the chamber settled back into its arrogant silence, Vorn did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked around the room, slowly, deliberately, making eye contact with each delegate one by one. Then he said something that would later be replayed across 1,000 star systems. "You have been warned." He turned. He walked out. No theatrics. No pleading. No second speech. Just those 4 words hanging in the recycled air of the most powerful room in the galaxy. And while the empires of the Galactic Council spent the next 6 months mocking that moment, sharing recordings of it, using it as a punchline at diplomatic dinners, Earth went quiet. Completely. Eerily. Quiet. No transmissions. No trade negotiations. No ambassadors. Just silence. The kind of silence that should have terrified them. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. Silence, in the galaxy, means one of 2 things. Either you are dead, or you are preparing. For 6 months, Earth transmitted nothing. No distress signals. No trade requests. No diplomatic communiques. The monitoring stations of 3 different empires confirmed it. Humanity had gone dark. The Galactic Council assumed the worst. Not for Earth. For themselves. Because the last time a civilization went this quiet before conflict, it was the Drenathy Collective, a species that spent 8 months in total silence, then emerged with a fleet so advanced it rewrote the military doctrine of 5 empires simultaneously. And the Drenathy were considered patient by galactic standards. Humans? Nobody had ever accused humans of being patient. So, what were they building? Deep inside Luna Station, Earth's primary military research complex, buried 3 kilometers beneath the moon's surface, the answer was taking shape. Dr. Sarah Malik stood in front of a display wall that stretched 40 meters wide. She hadn't slept in 31 hours. She didn't care. She was looking at something no human had ever seen before, the completed schematic of Project Anvil. 7 years of research, 11 dead ends. 2 catastrophic lab failures that had quietly been erased from the official record. And now this. It works, she said, quietly, to no one in particular. The engineer beside her, a young man named Deo who had been awake almost as long as she had, exhaled slowly. "How many can we produce?" he asked. Sarah turned to face him, and for the first time in months she smiled. Enough. What the Galactic Council didn't understand, what they never bothered to understand, was the fundamental truth about human innovation. Humans don't invent when they're comfortable. Humans invent when they're angry. When the Tharkon Empire had blockaded Earth's outer colonies 18 months ago, a bold, calculated move designed to slowly strangle humanity's expansion without triggering open war, they thought they were being clever. They thought they were applying pressure. What they were actually doing was lighting a fire. Because every human engineer, every physicist, every military strategist who had spent years working within the boundaries of what was considered acceptable galactic technology suddenly had one unified reason to stop caring about those boundaries. The Tharkon Empire had pushed. Now humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what happens next. The Tharkon Empire had existed for 4,000 years. 4,000 years. They had absorbed 16 civilizations, crushed 9 rebellions, outlasted 3 galactic wars. Their warships were the size of small moons. Their commanders had centuries of battlefield experience. They had never, not once, considered the possibility that they could lose. That arrogance was about to cost them everything. Admiral Kress of the Tharkon Imperial Fleet received the first report at 0400 Standard Galactic Time. A routine patrol near the edge of the Kepler corridor had gone silent. 3 ships, gone. No distress signal. No debris field. No radiation signature from a reactor breach. Just gone. He dismissed it. Equipment malfunction. Navigation error. The Kepler corridor had unpredictable gravitational eddies. Ships had been lost there before. Then the second report came in. 6 ships this time. Then the third report. 14 ships. All within 90 minutes. All in different sectors. All gone without a single recorded transmission. Admiral Kress sat very still in his command chair and felt something he hadn't felt in over 200 years of military service. Fear. What Project Anvil had produced wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It wasn't a bigger gun. It wasn't a faster ship. It wasn't a more powerful shield. It was something the galactic community had theorized about for centuries, but unanimously declared impossible: a selective phase disruptor capable of targeting a ship's quantum signature from 3 light minutes away and simply removing it from normal space. No explosion, no wreckage, no warning. One moment the ship exists, the next moment it doesn't. Clean, silent, absolute, and the most terrifying part? The affected ships didn't even have time to realize what was happening. Their crews experienced nothing. No alarm, no impact, no final transmission. They were just gone. Dr. Malik had spent 3 years wrestling with the ethics of what she was building. She had written reports, filed objections, lost sleep over the moral weight of a weapon this absolute. Then she had watched the Tharkon Empire's blockade slowly suffocate Earth's outer colonies, watched supply ships turn back, watched families go without medicine, watched children grow up behind an invisible wall built by an empire that laughed at the idea of human resistance. She filed no more objections after that. Back in the Galactic Council chamber, the mood had shifted. The jokes about humanity had stopped. The Tharkon delegate, a towering figure named High Commander Veth, draped in ceremonial armor that had been worn by his bloodline for 1,000 years, was standing before the council demanding answers. 23 ships lost. No explanation. No enemy sighted. No battle. Just silence. The same silence humanity had been sitting in for 6 months. And in the corner of that chamber, one of the quiet figures who had not laughed at Elias Vorn's warning leaned slowly toward another and whispered 3 words. It has begun. There is an old human saying, you never hear the bullet that gets you. The Tharkon Empire was learning that lesson at a scale that had no precedent in galactic history. And the worst part, they still didn't know who was pulling the trigger. High Commander Veth was not a man who panicked. He had commanded fleets through supernova events. He had navigated political assassinations that toppled 3 governments simultaneously. He had once held a battle line for 11 days against an enemy that outnumbered him 6-1. He did not panic, but standing in the Galactic Council chamber, watching the loss reports stack up on his personal display, 41 ships now, across 9 different sectors, he felt something far more dangerous than panic. He felt confusion. And for a military commander, confusion is a death sentence. It has to be the Drenethi, he said flatly. This has their signature. The Drenethi delegate, a tall, silver-skinned figure named Counselor Ain, rose slowly from her seat. Her voice was measured, precise, cold. The Drenethi have been at peace for 60 years, High Commander. We have no quarrel with your empire. We have no motive. And she paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to sting. We have never operated with this level of efficiency. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Even the Drenethi, one of the most advanced civilizations in the known galaxy, were quietly, grudgingly acknowledging something remarkable. Whoever was doing this was better than them. Commander Elias Vorn was sitting in a small, unremarkable office on Earth's eastern seaboard when his communicator chimed. He picked it up, read the message, set it down. Then he walked to his window and looked out at the ocean. The waves were steady, rhythmic, indifferent to the chaos currently unfolding 40 light-years away. He thought about the chamber, the laughter, the way the council delegates had looked at him like he was a child delivering a clumsy school performance. He thought about the outer colonies, families he had personally visited during the blockade inspections, a woman named Dara on Kepler 7 who had shown him her rationing card with shaking hands. Her youngest daughter, maybe 4 years old, watching him with large, quiet eyes from behind her mother's leg. That daughter was 7 now. The blockade had lasted 3 years. 3 years of a galactic superpower slowly grinding human lives into dust because they believed, genuinely, completely believed, that no consequence would ever come for it. Vorn picked up his communicator again. He typed a single word back. Continue. On Luna Station, Dr. Malik received the confirmation and turned to her team. The room was tense. Brilliant minds from every corner of Earth, physicists, engineers, strategists, ethicists who had eventually chosen pragmatism over principle, all of them waiting. Phase 2, she said quietly. Someone in the back of the room exhaled sharply. Because Phase 1 had been a demonstration, targeted, controlled, designed to create confusion and fear without triggering a full galactic war. Phase 2 was a message so loud, so undeniable, so specifically engineered to reach the Galactic Council at the precise moment they were most vulnerable that no delegate in that chamber would ever laugh at a human voice again. It would take 72 hours to execute. 72 hours that the Tharkon Empire would spend in mounting breathless terror, scrambling their remaining fleets, burning through emergency protocols, filing desperate communications to allies who were suddenly very reluctant to respond. Because the rest of the galaxy was watching now, and they were beginning to ask a question that had no comfortable answer. What did humanity build while they were quiet? 72 hours. That's all it took. 72 hours to make 4,000 years of Tharkon supremacy feel like it meant nothing. It started with a transmission, not a weapon, not a fleet movement, not a declaration of war. A transmission sent simultaneously to every member of the Galactic Council, every independent civilization within 40 light-years, and, most deliberately, directly to the personal command frequency of High Commander Veth himself. It contained no threats, no demands, just coordinates, 17 sets of them, each one corresponding to a Tharkon military installation, command stations, weapons depots, fleet refueling platforms, that humanity had been quietly, patiently mapping for the last 4 years during what the Tharkon Empire had casually dismissed as routine human exploration vessels. They hadn't been exploring, they had been studying, and attached to each set of coordinates was a single timestamp. All 17 timestamps were identical. 72 hours from now. High Commander Veth read the transmission 3 times. Then he did something his officers had never seen him do in 2 centuries of service. He stood up from his command throne and walked out of the room without saying a word. His second-in-command, a sharp-minded tactician named Subcommander Lyra, stared at the empty throne for a long moment before taking action. She immediately ordered full evacuation of all 17 installations. She didn't debate it, didn't question it, didn't wait for Veth to return, because she was a tactician, and tacticians recognize when the enemy has already won the information war. If humanity knew about all 17 installations classified, heavily encrypted, some of them completely off the official record, then the question wasn't whether to believe the transmission. The question was, what else do they know? The evacuations were chaotic. 17 simultaneous emergency protocols across 9 sectors meant thousands of personnel scrambling into transport vessels, officers burning through authentication layers to access emergency jump coordinates, equipment being abandoned, systems being wiped. It was the single largest unplanned military withdrawal in Tharkon history, and every moment of it was being observed. Not by Earth's fleet. Humanity had no fleet positioned in those sectors. By the rest of the galaxy. The Galactic Council's monitoring networks were lighting up. Independent traders were reporting the mass Tharkon movements across open frequencies. 3 separate news aggregator systems, run by neutral civilizations who sold information the way humans sold commodities, had already begun broadcasting the developing story to anyone who would pay for a subscription. The Tharkon Empire, the most feared military force in the known galaxy, was running from a species they had blockaded for 3 years, from a species whose delegate they had laughed at 6 months ago, from humans. In the Galactic Council chamber, the silence was suffocating. Nobody was laughing now. High Counselor Marin, the ancient stone-skinned being who had leaned forward to ask Elias Vorn if he was threatening the galaxy, sat motionless at the head of the council table. Around her, delegates were talking in urgent, hushed clusters. Some were pulling up star maps. Others were quietly contacting their own military advisors. A few were doing something that would have seemed utterly absurd 6 months ago. They were pulling up Earth's historical military records, reading them, actually reading them. The Drenethi Counselor Ain was already 3 hours into a deep briefing with her intelligence division. She had personally flagged 17 specific moments across human history, wars, sieges, technological breakthroughs, moments where humanity had been backed into a corner and responded in ways that defied every logical projection. She compiled her findings into a report. The title of that report would later become one of the most quoted documents in galactic diplomatic history. It was called The Pattern, and its opening line read, "Humanity does not fight when threatened. Humanity fights when ignored. And by the time they begin, they have already finished preparing." The 72-hour clock was still running. 61 hours remained. And somewhere deep beneath the lunar surface, Dr. Sarah Malik was standing in front of her display wall again, watching the evacuation confirmations roll in from all 17 installations. Her team was quiet behind her. Nobody was celebrating. Nobody was cheering, because they all understood something important. This wasn't the victory. This was the demonstration. The real message hadn't been sent yet. She checked the clock. Then she turned to her team and said 4 words that every single person in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. Prepare the final sequence. There is a moment in every conflict, every real conflict, where one side realizes the fight was never equal. Not because of ships, not because of weapons, not because of numbers, because of will. The Tharkon Empire was standing at the edge of that moment, and they had no idea how far the drop was. High Commander Veth returned to his command throne exactly 40 minutes after he had walked away from it. He looked different, not broken, not defeated, but something had shifted behind his eyes. Some fundamental certainty that had lived there for 200 years had quietly packed its belongings and left. He looked at Subcommander Lyra. Status of the evacuations? 14 installations cleared, 3 in final stages, all personnel accounted for. She paused. "Sir, the Council is requesting your presence for an emergency session." Veth was quiet for a long moment. "Tell them I'll be there in 2 hours." They said immediately, sir. He turned to look at her directly. "Tell them 2 hours." What Veth did in those 2 hours was something no one in the Tharkon military hierarchy ever fully disclosed. But what is known from the personal logs that surfaced decades later is that he spent those 2 hours reviewing a single file, not a battle plan, not an intelligence report, not a tactical projection, a history file, specifically Earth's history file. From the beginning, he read about a species that had spent thousands of years fighting itself, not between humans and aliens, but human against human, continent against continent, ideology against ideology, generation after generation of internal conflict so brutal, so relentless, so ingeniously destructive that most galactic civilizations who reviewed Earth's early history simply concluded that humanity would self-destruct before it ever reached the stars. They were wrong, because what those civilizations failed to understand is that every one of those brutal internal conflicts had been a lesson. Humans had learned how to fight from each other, learned how to deceive, how to endure, how to innovate under pressure, how to lose everything and rebuild. how to look a superior enemy in the face and find the one crack, the one overlooked weakness, the one arrogant assumption, and drive something sharp and permanent through it. 4,000 years of Tharkon supremacy, and in 30 years of quiet study, humanity had found 17 cracks. Veth closed the file. He understood now what his empire had done. They hadn't blockaded a colony system. They had poked the most persistently dangerous species in the known galaxy, and then laughed at it. 43 hours remained on the clock when the emergency Galactic Council session began. The chamber felt different now. The ornate lighting that usually gave the room its sense of ancient authority seemed somehow dimmer. The delegates sat closer together than protocol dictated, an unconscious herding instinct that the Drenithi counselor Aim noted with quiet, clinical interest. High Counselor Marin called the session to order. "We have received Earth's transmission," she said slowly. "We have observed the Tharkon withdrawal, and we are now faced with a situation that requires unprecedented clarity." She paused, her stone-gray eyes moving across the chamber. "I am formally requesting that Earth's representative be recalled to this chamber for dialogue." The room murmured in agreement. Then a voice from the communications panel spoke. Calm, measured, familiar. Elias Vorn. He had been patched in remotely. No travel, no ceremony, no standing at the center platform while the galaxy looked down at him. Just his voice, filling the chamber from every speaker simultaneously. "High Counselor," he said, "I appreciate the invitation. I have a question before we begin." Marin straightened slightly. "Proceed." 6 months ago, I stood in your chamber and delivered a warning. I asked the Council, and specifically the Tharkon Empire, to end the blockade of Earth's outer colonies and leave humanity in peace. He paused. What changed between then and now? The silence that followed was exquisite, because every delegate in that room knew the answer. Nothing had changed diplomatically. Nothing had changed politically. No new evidence had emerged. No new argument had been made. The only thing that had changed was that humanity had demonstrated, quietly, precisely, and without a single shot fired, that they could reach inside the most fortified military infrastructure in the galaxy and turn the lights off whenever they chose. That was the only thing that had changed, and every delegate in that room was now acutely, uncomfortably aware of what that meant for their installations, their own classified coordinates, their own encrypted frequencies, their own assumption that humanity had been too young, too fragile, too foolish to be taken seriously. Vorn let the silence hold for exactly 10 seconds. Then he spoke again. "I'll be at the platform in person. Tomorrow morning. Standard Galactic Time." The channel closed. On Luna Station, Dr. Malik was standing in front of the final sequence display when her communicator chimed. She read the message, smiled, then addressed her team. "Stand down, Phase 2, she said. "We won't need it." A wave of visible relief moved through the room, but Malik held up one hand. "Stand down," she repeated, "but do not dismantle. Do not archive. Do not power down a single system." She looked at every face in that room. They need to know it exists. They need to know it works. And they need to spend every single day going forward wondering whether today is the day we decide to use it. She turned back to the display. That uncertainty, that is the weapon. 39 hours remained on the clock. Nobody slept. Not in the Tharkon command centers. Not in the Galactic Council chamber. Not in the quiet offices of a dozen civilizations who were frantically, desperately reviewing their own histories of contact with humanity and asking themselves a question that had no comfortable answer. What else have they been quietly preparing? The next morning came like a verdict. No fanfare, no ceremony, no fleet of warships positioned dramatically at the galaxy's edge. Just one man, walking back into the chamber that had laughed at him 6 months ago. Elias Vorn stepped onto the speaking platform at precisely 0900 Standard Galactic Time. He wore no military uniform, no medals, no ceremonial armor that announced power the way the Tharkon delegates always did, layers of metal and history designed to make the viewer feel small. He wore a simple dark jacket, Earth colors, He stood at the center of the most powerful room in the known galaxy and looked exactly the way he had looked the first time, calm, unhurried, like a man who had already won and simply came back to collect. High Counselor Marin spoke first. Commander Vorn. Her voice carried none of its former condescension. Something older and more careful had replaced it. Earth has made its position clear. We are prepared to discuss the terms of... There are no terms, Vorn said. The chamber stirred. Marin paused. I beg your pardon? There are no terms to negotiate, he said. The blockade of Earth's outer colonies ends today. Permanently. All Tharkon military assets withdraw from the Kepler corridor and the surrounding sectors within 30 standard days. All trade routes previously restricted by imperial decree are reopened with full neutral party oversight. He paused. These are not negotiating positions. They are the conditions of continued peace. The Tharkon delegate, a replacement, not Veth, who had quietly requested medical leave that morning, rose from his seat with barely contained fury. You are speaking to the Galactic Council, he said tightly. You are speaking to empires that have existed longer than your civilization has had written language. You do not issue conditions. Vorn looked at him. Just looked at him. The kind of look that carries an entire unspoken conversation in a single second. Try us. The Tharkon delegate sat back down. What happened next became the most studied moment in galactic diplomatic history for the next 300 years. Not because of what Vorn said, because of what he did after. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small metallic chip on the surface of the speaking platform. That, he said, addressing the entire chamber, is a recording. 72 hours of data collected during what your monitoring systems logged as routine background interference. He let that land. It contains the complete quantum signature profiles of every military installation belonging to every member of this council. The silence was absolute. We are not sharing this data as a threat, Vorn continued. We are sharing it as a courtesy so that everyone in this room understands, with complete clarity, what humanity has known for the last 4 years while we were being blockaded, dismissed, and laughed at. He looked around the chamber one final time. We did not want this knowledge. We would have been perfectly happy, trading peacefully, expanding quietly, and living our lives on the edges of your great civilization. His voice remained even, controlled, but something deep inside it carried the weight of every rationing card, every hungry child, every human being who had spent 3 years being slowly crushed by an empire that considered them insignificant. You made this necessary, and now it exists, and it will always exist, because that is what humans do when you back us into a corner. He picked up the chip, returned it to his pocket. We don't just survive, we learn. The vote to accept Earth's conditions passed in 40 minutes, the fastest resolution in Galactic Council history. Not one delegate voted against it. Not one. 3 weeks later, the first supply ships reached Earth's outer colonies. Commander Vorn wasn't there for the official ceremonies. He didn't stand at podiums or give speeches or accept the commendations that were quietly, somewhat awkwardly offered by 3 separate governments who had previously considered humanity beneath serious diplomatic attention. He was on Kepler 7, standing in a small community center that smelled like recycled air and old metal, watching supply crates being unloaded by people whose hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from relief so deep it had nowhere else to go. A woman named Dara found him standing near the entrance. She looked older than he remembered. 3 years of a blockade does that to people. But she was smiling. Behind her, holding her hand, was a little girl with large, quiet eyes who was now 7 years old and seeing fresh food for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember. Dara didn't say anything grand, didn't thank him with words designed for history books. She just looked at him and nodded once. The way one human looks at another when language isn't enough. Vorn nodded back. Months later, in a quiet intelligence briefing room on the Drenethi homeworld, Counselor Ain presented the final version of the pattern to her government senior leadership. She walked them through every data point, every historical parallel, every moment where humanity had been underestimated and had used that underestimation as a weapon. When she finished, the room was silent for a long time. Then the senior intelligence director asked the question everyone was thinking. How advanced are they now? After everything they built during the silence, Project Anvil, the phase disruptors, the quantum signature mapping, what is Earth's actual current military capability? Ain considered the question carefully. That, she said, is precisely the point. We don't know, and neither does anyone else. She paused. What we built our assessments on, their fleet numbers, their conventional weapons, their known technology, none of that accounts for what they developed during a period when they had every reason to push past every limit they had previously observed. She looked at her director. We know what they showed us. We have no idea what they kept. Another long silence. So, what do we do? The director asked. Ain's answer was simple. We don't laugh, she said. We never laugh again. Back on Earth, in a small, unremarkable office on the eastern seaboard, Elias Vorn sat by his window and watched the ocean. The waves were the same as they had always been. Steady, rhythmic, indifferent. He thought about a chamber full of ancient civilizations laughing at a single human voice. He thought about the silence that followed. The quiet, purposeful, productive silence. He thought about Dara's daughter with her large, quiet eyes and her first proper meal in 3 years. And he thought about something a very old general had told him once. A man who had spent 60 years studying conflict across every scale imaginable, who had leaned across a table and said in a low, serious voice, "The most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a weapon, son. It's a patient people with a long memory and nothing left to lose." Vorn smiled, picked up his coffee, watched the ocean. Humanity was 30,000 years old. Patient wasn't even close to the right word. Somewhere in the Galactic Council's archives, a recording from 6 months ago continued to exist, a human delegate, calm and unhurried, delivering for quiet words to the most powerful room in the galaxy. You have been warned. They had laughed. The galaxy would not make that mistake again.